My name is David Crommett. I'm an actor and director, musician. I have always worked in both Spanish and English. And I was born in New York City. My family moved to Puerto Rico when I was 6. And I finished school there and then came to the States. But Puerto Rico kept calling me back.
The first time I worked with David Cromet was at a production at was then Dumé Spanish Theater, which later became Thalia Spanish Theater, a beautiful, beautiful theater in Queens.
I founded Pregones with Rosalba and with Luis Melendez of blessed memory. And we started the company in 1979.
What I admired most about David is what I admire in all actors, which is his talent. And he was always prepared. And he was really, really disciplined on stage. So we felt very safe working together in that production and in future productions.
I trained by doing. I did not particularly care for the teaching of acting in American schools. I was very fortunate, especially starting in Puerto Rico. My first 6 shows were at the Teatro Tapia, the Tapia Theater in Old San Juan, which in looking back is a wonderful way to start. It's 600 seats, old Spanish theater. So I started there. I did one zarzuela, a bunch of musicals. And that was my training. And I would say, therefore, that I trained by doing.
I met Luis Melendez, actually, because we were working together on a project at the Association of Hispanic Arts. And we clicked immediately. We became instant friends forever. He was the ultimate teatrero. He was like an encyclopedia. He had this extensive experience in Teatro Popular, in popular theater, and he was just always the go-to person for me and for us as we were putting our new company together.
And we had such a great synergy, and we hit on the idea of starting a company. I had spent a year in Latin America after college, traveling with theater companies. It was a wonderful opportunity. I also got a perspective on Puerto Rico vis-a-vis the United States. And I saw how they could do collage and how they could do anthologies with a point of view. And we wanted to have the United States and the community here, the Latin community, get to know the native playwrights of Puerto Rico.
Some of the most salient contributions of David and Luis was a combination of depth of knowledge about theater and aesthetics. And on the one hand, there was this knowledge about the Latin American popular theater movement combined with the aesthetics of the time and understanding that we also had some training of our own, our musical training, our theater training, movement, dance. So all of that put together allowed us to really see eye to eye in the way we were crafting our first production.
And we selected key scenes from maybe 6, 7, 8 different playwrights and wove them together with live music and live sound effects. And we had a synergy, the 3 of us, Luis, Rosalba, and me, that is very rare and very important in the theater. As I look back, I tell young people, look for a triumvirate, look for a group of 3, but that because it worked beautifully. And it was a very transformative time looking back at it. I'm very grateful.
The 3 of us, David, Luis, and I, had the same thing in common. We had been in New York only for a few years, having come from Puerto Rico. And we were really inspired by the work that the other theaters were doing in the city, and certainly, especially the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, but then Repertorio Español and Inter and La Tea and El Portón. But we felt that we had something else we could contribute to enhance the presence of Puerto Rican theater in the landscape of New York Latino theater in general.
The first production was called Pregones, La Colección, Pregones Touring Puerto Rican Theater Collection. I believe we incorporated under that name. And it was a collection of key scenes. Of course, a key scene was defined by the fact that it had good roles for us.
La Colección was pretty special because that's what basically launched us into this track of collection pieces that could be a 2-minute piece or a 10-minute piece.
Luis Melendez and I did a scene from Un Jíbaro, by Ramon Mendez Quiñones. We'd get behind a trunk, we'd lift the top of the trunk, and we'd play the two puppets. And that writing was just fabulous. And we had such a great time with it.
I remember one day when I said something like, oh, this is sort of a style, this is our style. And Luis said, not yet, we're still looking for it.
I also remember a woman named Carmen Gutierrez, who was a little older, left the company. There was a great role called Mama Toña in Vejigantes by Francisco Arribí. And we said, well, we don't have a younger woman here. We have to let go of the scene. And Luis insisted on doing the scene in drag and playing Mama Toña. And it was a riot. He was so funny. And I remember thinking that Rosalba and I could have had paper bags on our heads and nobody would have noticed us because he absolutely stole it. And he was wonderful in the role.
The first generation of musicians that worked with us spanned several years. So the first two, I remember, Cano and Eduardo, were just an amazing combination of strings and percussion.
And we were fortunate to find two musicians from a company that was closing called Teatro Cuatro, which was formed by two Argentinian, at that point, they couldn't go back to Argentina, which were the Chicones. Years later, they were at the Public Theater doing the Festival Latino. And Victor Fragoso, who was a professor, he knew them and brought them in. And Cano was a wonderful guitarist and singer, Hebrew singer. Eduardo was more than a percussionist. He was a soundscaper. I mean, he was one of the great listeners of all time. I remember him, we'd be doing a monologue, and I just surfed on what he was doing, But we wanted them to have a spot, not just be on the side commenting. We wanted to give them a spot. So we created at the beginning of the second half a musical segment where they would be forward and playing. But we also thought, let's get them in the acting too. So the musicians began to have bits and things to do in scenes, improvisations, commentary, very funny things we created.
After Cano and Eduardo, we had Elba Lugo is one of the female cuatristas from Puerto Rico that was living in New York at the time, and she brought an immense sound to our productions, and Roberto Lugo, and on and on.
We began to make more of an actor-musician meld. Everybody did everything, and it was joyous. It was joyous. And it also allowed us to expose more authors from Puerto Rico, because we would take poems and set them to music. And we had Julia de Burgos and Juan Antonio Correger and others whose work got to be known because we set it to music.
Those first years were shaped by, musically speaking, in terms of our aesthetic, by the presence of these musicians who were willing to improvise with us and to spend hours and hours in rehearsals and create an environment that was proper for the production that we were planning.
Right from the beginning, there was not that distinction so much. It was key to make the production work, that collection, that anthology. But it was also, no, we all give of ourselves, we all burn this way too, and we give light to each other.
We chose the name Pregones because in many ways it was a reflection of the way we wanted to work. Pregones is the Spanish word for the chants of the street vendors.
El mundo, el imparcial, pan de agua, street vendors. So when we were thinking of a name for the group, I said, my first memory, the first thing I think of when I think of Puerto Rico was Pregones.
Pan de Mallorca, que el pan de Mallorca. Pan de Mallorca, que el pan de Mallorca. Y se lo come el niño, la niña, la abuela, y todo le gusta el pan de Mallorca. My name is Sandra Rodríguez. Mi nombre espiritual es Sandranía Rodríguez Rivera. And I am part of the first generation of actors that came into Pregones circa 1979.
The first time I met Sandra was at Teatro Cuatro, which was a beautiful theater in East Harlem, in El Barrio. Prior to Sandra, there had been other actresses that had joined us briefly, but had also contributed a lot, like Marta de la Cruz and Socorro Santiago. Sandra had been working on a project with Victor Fragoso, who became our mentor, or had been our mentor actually for some time. And she was also known to Willie Nieves, who was another one of our mentors. And Sandra was doing a project with Victor. Victor was a poet and a great writer, and she was doing a project. And he said to us, I know this young woman who is an amazing actress and singer.
And we went to a production at Teatro Cuatro, just as they were winding up. We saw her. I remember Luis Rosalba and I went.
We saw her work and we fell in love instantly.
She balances out beautifully, personality-wise, type-wise, and she was a really good trained singer. So we could put her up there with Cano, who was a great tenor, and then we could do harmonies.
She was a great actress, a singer, my God, her voice, her writing.
She could be lead, she could be character. She was very warm and effusive, and she was very endearingly like, well, I don't know, but if you guys think I can do it, I'll try. That's all you need. That's all you need. So for me, we really gelled at that point.
When I started working with David Cromet, I was impressed and at the same time very intimidated by his intensity. He was a very intense actor.
She was a wonderful spirit and became a very fine actress, was always a great singer. And then years later, she's this wonderful writer. I'm like, there you go. Collective creation.
I used to see him perform and I was like, they did La Carreta and he did Carnaval Afuera, Carnaval Adentro. And that monologue, that was amazing. I love the physicality of that David and the intensity that David brought into that character. And then at the same time, he played the cuatro and he sang.
I remember we went to a cuatro maker in Brooklyn in the middle of the winter, Rosendo Acosta. I wanted a Puerto Rican cuatro. He was Puerto Rican, and all he had was a Korean cuatro. And he finally said, okay, I'll give you a Puerto Rican cuatro, come back Saturday. We went back, we bought the cuatro for $150, I remember. And he gave me the cuatro with a Made in Korea sticker taken off of it. So that was the first cuatro we had to go.
The very first song I sang at Pregones was with La Colección. And I remember because when Luis passed away, I went to the cemetery and I sang that on his entierro. And that's the song I said, because now in heavens, we're going to open the curtains for this wonderful actor to go to heaven. Pero dice así, enciendan las luces, las cortinas abran, el desbarajuste es parte de la trama, el drama comedia, no, tragedia comedia, el drama la farsa, tragedia comedia, una ronda larga, la hora soñada, toda esta locura y toda esta magia, nosotros, ustedes, una ronda larga, que ríe y que canta, abriendo la rosa, que empiece la farsa, ya llegó el momento, la hora soñada, doña Ana no está aquí, que está en su vergel, abriendo la rosa y cerrando el clavel.
The role of music is fundamental in the development of our work. Sometimes a particular idea comes from a musical idea. It may come from a sense of environment and that requires a certain sound. However it is that we conceive a new project, by now it is very hard to think about it without thinking of the role that music will play. Because we think theatrically and we think musically.
This was the first place I worked when I moved to New York City as a young artist. It's one of the only places in New York where I can explore my artistic side and my culture.
We are so proud to be recognized as one of the leading Latinx theater ensembles in the nation. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being part of our family.
A theater collective is a reflection of a practice that has evolved over many decades around the world by theater practitioners. And it is really a commitment that a group of artists make to work together towards shaping an idea.
There is a saying by Viktor Frankl, who was a psychoanalyst and a Holocaust survivor, and it's a rather dire saying, but I think it has to do with this. It says, that which gives light must first endure burning. And what I like about collective creation is that everybody who wants to give light has to give of themselves. You can't be an observer outside criticando or, giving notes or analyzing. You have to open yourself up, and you earn the right to be commenting on others' work, interacting.
It is that sort of ongoing negotiation of creating together and at some point stepping back and let each person play the role that they're playing. So the collective approach really does follow a methodology.
If you're not on stage or doing a role, you are doing something else. There's no defined roles. There's no categorization. There's no credentialism. It's like, oh, you're okay, good. You're doing this? Good. I'll be over here with the lights, or I'll be over here bringing you the props, and so forth. It was a more egalitarian model, obviously collaborative, required an ongoing, albeit evolving core of people, and with a larger cause which everybody embraced, which was societal. Some people may say political, I would say societal. So that I loved. It made a lot of sense to me.
It is really a commitment and a promise we make to each other to make that work with a certain methodology. And that is what we were called to do in approaching our work this way.
And it allowed us to begin to do all kinds of things with Pregones. If we weren't acting, we were putting poems to music, we were learning how to play instruments. Everybody became a side man to everybody else, side person, side woman, if you will.
I think that has to do with the fact that we have had amazing musical directors and musicians who have been so committed to the work of Pregones, who have trained themselves in theater just so that we can all be together on a stage.
Having one person coordinate, because I cannot call it that is totally one person. It's him taking insumos from everybody and putting it together. And then there are times that he's composing all of it himself. And then, but he has to bring it back to the collective to kind of make it work. So, and that's what I felt, that the music took a different dimension in the company. Being Pregones nowadays, one of the most musically excellent, with excellence, in terms of the musical performance.
It is all part of the development of the action at that particular moment. So music is very much a part of our DNA.
Once we brought trained musicians to do composing for the company, the music took a different level, but still we, Rosalba composed a little song, I would put something together, and then Juan Manuel would put something together, or Roberto, or Tomás, and each one brought something special.
Jose Manuel brought in that, added to what we already had. He brought in composition. He brought in a very, very keen idea of dramatic sound. And so we were quite lucky to have him as well. Julio Santana is one of those musicians who also played a key leadership role in the composition and creation of some of our pieces. Julio is a cuatro player, and his sound was amazing. Julio was very, very important in the creation of some of the pieces that followed La Colección and that followed the early pieces that we did.
Arete de Pescadores was, I don't know, for me it was a great experience, because it took us to Vieques, where we traveled with Delfor Peralta, who was the director, and it was a pleasure working with him. And Delfor was an Argentinian director. And we all went to Vieques, and we experienced and we interviewed the fishermen and people involved in the resistance, trying to get the Marina out of Vieques. We premiered at the Public Theater. And I remember one of the lines was that he has the personality of a glass of water. And I love that. And of course, my favorite song was the Tango del Dinero that Rosalba wrote, and I had to sing it. And I was supposedly this woman that had an American husband, and I spent money. And it was dinero, que rico el dinero. El dinero me calza, el dinero me viste, el dinero me lleva a Europa a pasear. Mi marido es un gringo, un fantástico gringo, que me da dinero para malgastar. Con dinero ando toda la ciudad. Y si me falta un poco de dinero, para eso tengo 7 credit cards.
This was the first time that we thought, oh my goodness, it would be great to work with someone who can help us create an arc for what we're trying to do. And that's when we called in two amazing artists, Edward Gallardo, a playwright, and Delfor Peralta. That was a great combination. Here we were all of a sudden working with this Argentinian director and this New Yorker playwright and us.
That's Roberto Lugo, Heriberto Mateo, Rosalba, very young Rosalba, and a very young Alban.
Pregones, I met in the early 80s when they were performing. And it was just an amazing experience to see this group of actors and directors doing this very dynamic work linked with music. And I said, this is something really nice.
He's always been sort of the facility brain behind us, and that evolved over time. When we created our first theater, when we had our first theater, he oversaw that process, as well as when we built this one. So it's been a career that has contributed greatly to Pregones, and personally, because he became my life partner. So
when I first started with Pregones, I started doing some production work, very minimal, but then I got immersed into acting and performing with the company, developing a couple of the plays, and it was just a terrific experience. Later, when we started touring more intensely,
we decided to establish roots in the Bronx when it became evident that we needed a home base. We needed a place that could connect directly with audiences at home. Luis Melendez, again, he was working a lot with United Bronx Parents and that amazing leader that was Evelina Antonetti. And that's when we became also very involved with the Bronx Council on the Arts. Bill Aguado was the director at that point, and he was really a good friend, and he fell in love with our work. Between Bronx Council on the Arts and United Bronx Parents, we were able to put it all together and say, wow, we here have this family that is supporting our work in a very, very formal way, to the point where when a space became available at a Longwood project, which was an old school that had been transformed, and on Longwood Avenue, into the classrooms had been transformed into galleries and creative spaces. We were able to obtain one of those former classrooms, and that became our first formal office.
Longwood Avenue, we had an office space that we used to meet and rehearse. And I remember that Ted Hannon, that we brought him to do High Noon with us when Manuel Herrera couldn't do it. And he came and he did High Noon with us.
Ted Hannon is an actor and director, and we met him through Mass Transit Theater, a sort of local touring company that became very, very popular. And we saw Ted and we became friends, and our sort of politics and take on social issues was very similar. We were then developing the piece High Noon al Mediodía, which had to do with a workers' strike at a hospital. And then we began to talk about maybe working with him and him working with us, and he joined us as an actor, and as we always did, shared some sort of the directing bits and pieces of High Noon.
High Noon was our very first bilingual play. That one we brought Dolores Prida to write it with us. So she brought a little bit of that Broadway kind of a tone. And we have this rock and roll. Don't worry, baby, the name of the game is tax with help. Don't worry, baby. And then we did a little rock and roll, And then we have Mrs. Perkins, It's So Lonely at the Top. I wrote that one. I wrote those lyrics for that one. It's so lonely at the top when nobody really knows what goes on behind closed doors. Turun, tun, tun. If the workers only knew how I hate to. And right by news, pressure, of course, by the board. When the government says cut, I cut paychecks, I cut jobs, I cut services against my will. It's an easy not to bear. La, 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 la. Keeping my check very high is fair. Oh my goodness, that's a theater. That's a theater on 138th Street, 140, let's see, 138th Street on Brook Avenue. That was one of the nicest stories to tell always, because how it came about, is Padre Morales, Roberto Morales, who was the párroco of that church, of St. Anne's Church, which is a landmark, a beautiful church. One of the few churches that has a big garden, a big space. And the fact that he was a person who was very oriented towards sports, and he gave up his basketball court for us to do a theater because he understood the importance of the work that we did and the work that we could do for the community. So he says, build a theater. And against viento y marea, because it wasn't smooth sailing, we did it. We built that theater. I say we because everybody participated, and through that process, we created long-term relationships and friends.
Migrants was a metaphor for what we had done with La Colección. Migrants was a collection of historical pieces, of poems, of songs, of established historical records. It's one of those pieces where we delved into looking beyond a play or looking into plays and going into historical records and pull out something that would help us tell the story of the Puerto Rican migration. Migrants was also very much a part of our memory because it's the piece that brought in Jorge Merced. The first time I met Judith when she came to audition for Migrants, and Jose Joaquin Garcia is one of those artists that once you meet them, you will remember them forever. So Senance for us was really a turning point in the history of our theater. We had never thought we would have a space. We were still touring a lot, but perhaps something that stays with me is that it was at Senance where we transitioned from being only a producing theater company, theater ensemble, to a presenter.
I'm very emotional. These are wonderful memories. And I have to say that it's as if this is like waking up in a dream and 40 years have gone by. It seems like it was yesterday. And yet everything that happened for me came from that time together.